Hi, everybody, and hi, Alan. Alan Rockefeller joins us today from Ecuador to present the mushrooms of Ecuador. He'll share some amazing photos from the 5 years he spent documenting mushrooms in this fragile ecosystems of the Ecuadorian Amazon, one of the most biodiverse areas of the world. Besides his extensive travel schedule, research, speaking engagements, his current passion is participating in a collaborative citizen science effort to document fungi using DNA barcoding. Each mushroom is photographed, sequenced, and preserved, and the data is available to all. Alan is a friend of the MSSF and especially helpful in processing the mushrooms that come to the fungus fair for display and cataloging. Please welcome Alan Rockefeller.
Thank you, Mike. So you guys can see my screen, right?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, excellent. So I'm here in Ecuador, and I've been here for about a month now, and it is really nice here. It's been raining just about every day. It usually rains in the afternoon. And this photo that I'm showing right now, I took just a few feet from where I'm sitting. So really beautiful place here. I am in a province called Pastaza, and Pastaza is the largest province in Ecuador, and it's also the one with the least people. So Pastaza has just a couple roads going through the edge of it, but most of it is just completely wild. And it looks a lot like this. You got We are here at about a thousand meters elevation. So it's not really tropical. It's more like cloud forest. And I am in a place called Finca Hymatlos. So you can see coming over the trees here, this is what Finca Hymatlos looks like. It is an eco resort that is kind of like a high-end hotel that's right on the edge of the Amazon. And so I like to come here. One reason I like it is because my friend Furhat runs this place, and Furhat is a mushroom identification expert. So you might know him on Facebook. He identifies a whole lot of things. But here is a map of where I go in South America. And you can see I spend a bunch of time in Colombia near Medellin, and then also in Ecuador and in Brazil near Rio de Janeiro. But in Ecuador, I fly into Quito, and that's where the main airport is. And then where I really like to go is over here in Pastaza. And so this is where I like to go. And the Pastaza has almost no roads, so most of the state you have to reach by boat. What I'm going to start off showing you is all of the stuff that I photographed today. And so today I went out with an Olympus OM1 camera, and this camera has built-in photo stacking. And so I took a whole bunch of pictures. And the cool thing about this is that I don't need to do any work on these pictures. I just take the pictures that automatically get stacked. And so these are raw pictures that I haven't edited in any way. And they're just exactly what I saw on my hike this afternoon. And so this is a cool Thelephora, and this one turns bright blue in ultraviolet light. So you can see it's just like this really nice cobalt blue. I found this around sunset. And then here's a Mycena, and we find a ton of Mycenas around here. This one is Entoloma, and so this is an ultraviolet. And I like to use ultraviolet because it makes things look really cool, but it's also sort of like a chemical sensor in that you can see the different chemicals that aren't visible to the naked eye. So this Entoloma was real little. I found it about an hour ago, and this is what it looks like in white light. So I like to take the same picture in white light and ultraviolet light so you can see the difference. Here's this Mycena in white light, or in ultraviolet light and white light. And then this one is Cucina tricoloma. I almost didn't photograph this one, just kind of an afterthought, but somebody handed it to me and I said, wow, that looks really cool. So I just set it down in front of the camera, press the button, and ends up looking really cool. This one is Voyera, and Voyera is a microheterotrophic plant. It looks pretty cool in ultraviolet, also looks pretty cool in white light, but it's really tiny. And this plant has no chlorophyll. So you find it out in the middle of the jungle, and it has no green leaves, no leaves at all. It's just this little flower. And then we find a bunch of this stuff. This always grows on palm nuts, and it's a big mystery exactly what it is. It's probably some kind of penicillium, but everything that we are finding this trip, we're collecting. And so we have about 500 dried specimens from this trip. And so everything goes into the dehydrator and then gets saved for DNA barcoding. And so everything goes into the Institute for Biodiversity Herbarium in Quito and gets saved forever. So this little thing is a Hohenbuehlia. And what I did here is I took a bunch of bright LED lights and shined them on the mushrooms. So this is what it looks like in bright LED lights. And then here's the same photo in natural light. And one of the main differences is with LED light, your background is really dark, almost black. And then when you have natural light, then the mushroom is as bright as the background, so you can kind of see the colors in the background. This thing is really mysterious. It kind of looks like almost like some of the Ganodermas that we see out here with the long stem. I think the genus begins with a T, but this is going to be a really interesting one to DNA barcode. And then this is the most interesting find of today, and also probably the most interesting find of the whole trip. This is the Ecuadorian version of Lepiota luteophila. And so Lepiota luteophila is probably the rarest mushroom in the world. It only grows in San Mateo at the San Francisco watershed, but we found a really close relative today. So it glows really brightly in ultraviolet light, and then has bright yellow gills and kind of a brown cap. And so we're really surprised to see it here. But different versions of this mushroom, they're all different species, have turned up a few different places in the world. The real Lepiota luteophila is only in California, but it turned up just this week in Pakistan. It's been found in Indiana, and they're all completely different species. So kind of a species complex, but this thing is just ridiculously brightly fluorescent. And then in white light, it's also really bright yellow. And then this one is a little, I don't even know what to call this. A little gilled mushroom with a little stem. There's a lot of mushrooms here that we just do not have any idea what they are. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done on Ecuadorian mushrooms. So when I find a mushroom in California, if you collect 100 mushrooms, you might discover 20 new species. But in Ecuador, if you collect 100 mushrooms, you probably discover 80 new species. And we just got our first batch of DNA barcoding back from the Ecuadorian mushrooms, and almost none of them have DNA matches. So it's just like whatever you find, you pick it up, it's going to be novel. So there's a lot of work that we're going to do to try to figure out if these things have names. This one is a Favolacea. And so really tiny thing that's really closely related to Mycena. Here's another different Mycena. This one, I put it on iNaturalist and it just got identified. I think they're calling it a Chaetocaltheus. And I have no idea what that is, but that's the name they're applying. So maybe that's correct. Here's what Phaeoclavulina here. And so I found this about 10 a.m. this morning. And there's a lot of different Phaeoclavulinas, little coral things. And then there's also a ton of moths here. And so one cool thing that we have is a permanent moth light. And so this moth light, I can actually see in the distance as I'm giving this talk, there's about a dozen people gathered around it photographing the moths. But if you zoom in to this place on iNaturalist where the moth light is set up, you see about 3,000 or 4,000 different insects all in a 10-foot area. And so this one I like a lot because it has kind of a gold fringe, and then around the edges, it looks like there's drops of liquid metal, like there's mercury or something around the edges. And then this one's kind of big and bright green. I like the green ones, but they come in just all different colors and sizes, and the diversity is just incredible. Every time I come up to the moth light, there's something I've never seen before. This one is super tiny. And just huge diversity of colors and all sorts of crazy things here. Some of them have like spots on them to kind of mimic an owl eye. And then walking around the jungle at night is just, it's nothing like California. In California, when you walk around at night, it's basically the same as it is in the day, except you can't see anything. But in Ecuador, the jungle just completely comes alive at night, and you see all sorts of wildlife. So this is one that I saw last night. It's a beetle with a whole bunch of eggs. I'm no expert on beetles, so I just upload all this stuff to iNaturalist and let the experts sort it out. Here's a really cool butterfly that's kind of mimicking an owl eye. And then there's so many different katydids here. Here's a moth that looks like a little biplane. And then this one is an assassin bug. So this is relatively dangerous. You definitely don't want to let them bite you. It's actually amazing how safe the jungle is here. You just kind of wander around and there's very little that's out to get you. Though I will show you a few things that are sort of dangerous. This one I found last night, and this one is Pinellus pusillus. Maybe belongs in Mycena, but it's almost polypore-like. But this one is bioluminescent, so it glows in the dark. It's extremely dim. I did a 30-second exposure and could barely see it glow. And then I did a 6-hour exposure, and that did not work because the sun came up before the camera ran out of battery. And then here's a tiny little Mycena. This here is the eye of a frog. And so this frog, we found it just, here it is, a tree frog kind of over by the pond. And there are so many frogs here. So these things are really fun to photograph. Here's a different frog. This one here. And you can like zoom way in and see into its eye. But really cool things around here. I could flip through these forever. This one is kind of cool. This is Pseudohyatula irrata. And so it kind of looks like a Mycena, but has kind of a dark cap center. And then it has this yellow stem that's a little bit fuzzy. This is one of the most common mushrooms around here. See this one a lot. And then here's something that's sort of like a cordyceps. It's growing on a grasshopper. I'm not sure exactly what it is, so I just uploaded it to iNaturalist and tagged Richard Tejan, our cordyceps expert. He'll probably tell me exactly what it is. And then there's a ton of really cool plants. This is a cross-section of a fruit. But this plant is Myconia, and it has these ants that live inside of it. And they're edible ants, and they taste like lemonade. And so if you eat the ant, then it just, it's actually really delicious. Here's an Entoloma styroforum. And so it's just a white Entoloma, but in ultraviolet light, it turns bright blue. This one we find quite a bit. And then here's a Leucoagaricus. This one is super tiny. This is an ultraviolet light, and the same thing in white light. So really little leucoagaricus, but we noticed it because of shining black light around the jungle. A lot of stuff lights up, but this leucoagaricus lit up more than most things. And then here's this marasmius. We find a lot of marasmius here. This is something like marasmius hematocephalus. Has really cool, widely spaced gills. And then this one is a psilocybe. And so this is ultraviolet light. That's why it looks so purple. But in white light, it's kind of a little brown mushroom, but it stains blue where damaged, tastes like cucumber. And we did get some DNA barcode data back from this one, and it's really close to Psilocybe moseri from Ecuador, but probably a new species. This one's just kind of growing on kind of like muddy ground near a stream. We find a lot of different psilocybes here. Here's a cool seed pod, zooming in. It looks like that. There's our Psilocybe moseri type thing again. And here's a cool little Mycena that we did get DNA barcode back, data back on. This one's Mycena citricolor. And so I do a lot of focus stacking. And so focus stacking is where you take a whole lot of pictures and combine them into one picture. And it basically bends the laws of physics. So here is a different psilocybe that we found on a really long hike about 3 days ago. And this one, we walked further than we ever walked, several miles away, way off trail, and found this little spot in the jungle where there was a whole bunch of different psilocybes. And so I took a bunch of bright lights, put them behind the mushroom and just off to the side, and then took a whole bunch of different pictures. And when I combined them, what it's doing here is combining 23 pictures into one picture. And then you can see the detail, see really good detail here. We can zoom way in, see the stem texture. But it also is just really dramatic lighting because I put the lights behind there. And there's just a huge amount of biodiversity here with the frogs. This one is called a peanut head bug. And so you can see why they call it that. They look a little bit scary, but pretty harmless. And there's a ton of katydids here. This katydid I like because it looks kind of like black metal. And then this one is very dangerous. It's probably the most dangerous thing I've seen in Ecuador. And this one is Bothrops bilineatus. So this is a viper, and we found it kind of curled up on the tree. And if you look here, you can see the eyes. You can see it's got those viper type eyes. When I found this, I only had the 50 millimeter macro lens. And so I had to get uncomfortably close to photograph this thing. But it turned out pretty well. Most of the really dangerous snakes here are not found on the ground where you're going to step on them, but they're up in trees. So this was about 4 feet off the ground. And so it's pretty safe to walk around at night. You don't really have to watch where you step, but you don't really want to run through trees and brush at night because that's where these things hang out. Here's a katydid that is mimicking a leaf. You can tell it's a katydid because the antenna is much longer than the body. And then here is a gecko. And this gecko is just kind of sitting in the middle of the trail. He thought he was really well hidden. Wasn't as well camouflaged as he thought, but he was still enough that allowed me to get a nice focus stack shot of him. And then there's also a whole bunch of caves in Ecuador. And so if we go into these caves, they have all sorts of animals that are adapted to caves. So this is a little glass frog, and this frog is endemic to the cave, so it doesn't grow anywhere else. And then this is another cave animal. This one is super tiny, and this one is a pseudoscorpion. So pseudoscorpions don't sting. but it's got these huge pinchers here, and this one is a new species that my friends are working on naming. There's our gecko again. Here's an anole, and this anole was sitting on the same stick for more than 24 hours in the exact same place. So they just kind of hang out here and wait for something to come along. So it's kind of like the forest just feeds it. Here is a giant snail. This snail is native Ecuador. Here's my friend Jordan holding it up. And so these are edible, but it's not a good idea to eat the native ones. There is an invasive one that I saw a couple days ago, and that would be a better choice for dinner. But really big thing, just walking around the forest floor. And here's a really pretty leaf hopper. There's a ton of pretty leaf hoppers. And then here's a heliconia. And there are a lot of heliconias. You probably recognize these from gardens, but this particular species of heliconia is really rare. So I'm not an expert on plants. I just photograph them, put them on iNaturalist, and then you can see the distribution. A whole bunch of botanists will come and identify these things, but this one turned out to be super rare, and it's only been seen a few times. And then this is my friend Cruz, and Cruz lives in San Jose, and he is an expert on hallucinogenic plants. And so what he found here is an ayahuasca vine. And so this one is hallucinogenic. It's been used for thousands of years. And this vine contains an MAOI, which allows DMT to be orally active. And so it forms these huge vines. Here's a Guzmania, another super rare plant that is endemic to just a small area around here. Here's another one of our microheterotrophs. So this plant doesn't have any chlorophyll. There's the Voyera, another one without chlorophyll. So this one also, this is called Tiputinia. And this is another one that doesn't have chlorophyll, so never makes any leaves. But this thing smells really bad and attracts insects. And so the flies come and pollinate the plant. Here's a Justicia. And then a lot of these plants look really cool, but in ultraviolet, they look even cooler. And so the ultraviolet light makes the chlorophyll fluoresce bright red. And then this one is a bromeliad. So this is a relative of the pineapple. And in ultraviolet light, it also looks really cool. And the ultraviolet light is so bright that you can even take good photos with a cell phone. So this is one that I just snapped with my cell phone of this bromeliad with shining the ultraviolet light on it. Here is another one. This is an air plant. It's the same species that a lot of you might have in your house. Really commonly sold in stores in the Bay Area, but in ultraviolet light, it turns bright green or bright blue. And these things are all over the trees. You see them really common here. Here's the same thing in white light. And then this one is not an ultraviolet light. This is just the color of the mushroom. It's Clitosibula azurea. And so this little blue mushroom is actually super common here, and I've seen it probably 100 different times in the last month that I've been here in Ecuador. Here's a little Coprinopsis, so little inky cap thing. And then this one is Coprinellus. They always have these really cool dewdrops on them. And so these things also turn into ink. And this one here looks a lot like Psilocybe, but it's actually Indiconica. So when I find something that looks like this, the first thing I do is taste a little bit. And the psilocybin mushrooms taste like cucumber. But this one just tasted a little bit metallic, kind of like Sarsaparilla. So Diconica is not closely related to Psilocybe, but definitely could be mistaken for it. And then there's a ton of Hygrocybe here. This one is unusually bright. This one is a bright green, probably an undescribed species. But you got green hygroscopies, red hygroscopies, yellow, almost every color in the rainbow. And then this one here is leucocaprinus. And it's really cool because it makes these droplets. And so, you zoom away in and you see these little metabolites that are all over, just kind of like little droplets all over the place. And this one actually got a new genus about a month ago. We'll see if that actually sticks. And then this one is Marasmialis cubensis. So Marasmialis cubensis is named after Cuba, and really cool, just white sport thing. There's actually over 160 mushrooms that have the species epithet cubensis, all of them named after Cuba. So Cuba would be a really cool place to go mushroom hunting. Here's a marasmius, and this one looks like almost like it's exploding out of the mycelium at the base of the stem. Here's a different marasmius. And here I got the same photo with natural light and white light. Not quite sure what I like better, so I just put both of them in. And there's a ton of colors of Mycena here. Mycena are some of my favorite mushrooms. This particular one is Mycena chloroxantha. So Mycena chloroxantha has this cool bright yellow powder all over the cap, and then these long setae on the stem. These look really cool in the microscope. And these things are super cool, but they're also really small and really common. So if you never really see them until you sit down, and then if you sit down pretty much anywhere in the jungle and you look closely at the leaves, you'll see very likely this species or a couple hundred other species that look a lot like it. This one is probably undescribed, but in that group, also with the really long setae. And then this one is in the Mycena pura group. So this one has kind of intravenous gills. They glow in the dark. And then this Mycena, really cool because it's got a really viscid stem. So almost like little droplets of slime going up and down it. It's really tiny, just growing off of a leaf. There's the standard Mycena spinosima. We see these a lot. And zoom way in, they look really cool, even cooler under a microscope, super fragile. And then this one is super rare. This one is called Penicilliopsis, and Penicilliopsis grows only off palm nuts. And there's not too much agaricus here. Pretty rare to see them, but here's one of them. And so I got them in all different stages of development. You can see like this one, you can see the free gill attachment really well. And then you can see the veil over here. And then the veil will break, turn into a ring. And if you put potassium hydroxide on the cap, it turns bright yellow. And then there's a ton of entomopathogens, and entomopathogens eat insects. And so these are your cordyceps, Bovaria, Ophiocordyceps, Metarhizium. So you see those almost every day. And then this one is a bioluminescent mushroom. So with bioluminescent mushrooms, you walk in complete darkness and just look for glowing spots in the woods. And when I find them, then I'll take a long exposure photo and then take a photo with light. This particular one is an undescribed species of Pinellus, and it only grows on bamboo. It's super small. And as soon as I'm done with this talk, I'm going to lead a bioluminescent mushroom hunt, and a whole bunch of people are getting together, and we're going to walk around the woods in complete darkness and look for glowing things. You can see how small this one is. Here's another bioluminescent one. This one is just a glowing leaf. And so a lot of times you're walking around the woods and you see just thousands of glowing leaves all over the place. And then they'll have kind of rhizomorphic mycelium. It's probably Mycena. This one is definitely Mycena. This is one of the brighter ones that I see. You can see it from like 30 or 40 feet away because it's really bright. So here's what it looks like in the daylight. And then for this, I did a focus stacked photo, which is why it looks like it's nice and in focus. So it's 35 pictures combined, and each picture is 35 seconds each. And so I just like start the camera, walk away for 20 minutes, and then come back and it's done. And then take another picture in white light so you can see exactly what they look like. Here's a different species of Mycena. And this one, only the stem glows. Well, the caps glow like really dimly. So here's what the caps look like. But in complete darkness, it just looks like a whole bunch of stems. And this one is a campanella, kind of cool interveno skills. And then here is a weird cordyceps type thing. It's actually called Gymnoascus, and it's found on bat guano in caves. That's how it starts out. And then it turns yellow after a while. This one's kind of cool. This is called Talaromyces palmae, and it only grows on palm nuts. So this is a photo in ultraviolet light, and this is in white light. So this one we found in a cave, and it's just because this palm nut rolled into the cave and fruited there. But if you zoom way in, you can see it has these metabolites, and the metabolites are super fluorescent. So there's some kind of chemical in the metabolites of this fungus that turn ultraviolet light into white light. Here's a slime mold. This one is called Serratiomyxa morcella, and it's kind of cool because it has these stems that look like they're made of glass. It's extremely tiny. And then the more familiar Serratiomyxa fruticulosa, also a slime mold. So these are metabolizing bacteria that are growing on the wood. And these things are more closely related to amoebas than they are to fungi. And you touch them and they just turn into slime. This is one of my favorite mushrooms. This one here, we call it Clavaria schäferi, but that one was described from Germany, and nobody actually knows what Clavaria schäferi looks like. So probably a new species. We collected this last year and DNA barcoded it, and it does not match anything in GenBank. In fact, it doesn't even match any Clavarias, so it probably needs a whole new genus. But really cool, really common, bright purple coral. Here's Cucina. And so we see a lot of these. And then this one is a cordyceps that grows on a Melanontha beetle. So it's Ophiocordyceps melanonthae. And if you zoom way into this one, you can see the parathecia. So that's how it makes its spores. All these little bumps here are little flask-shaped cells that make the spores. We find a ton of different cordyceps here every day. Probably find a dozen different collections of cordyceps, one of the most common things. But this is one of my favorite ones. This one is called Cordyceps nidus, and it's growing on a trapdoor spider. So here is the dead spider here, and then this is the trapdoor. So the spider just sits there and waits for people, waits for insects to come along, opens up the trapdoor and eats it. But then if the cordyceps gets it, then it just fruits out of the trapdoor and makes the fruiting body here. And then this one is called Ophiocordyceps crocurilianum, and it's growing on a weevil. And so you can see this weevil, it's got this long snout that it uses to burrow into nuts. And then it's this crazy red thing fruiting out of the top. And to find stuff like this, we flip over leaves. So just walking through the jungle, we kind of look, and on this day, I went and I flipped over a leaf, and the first leaf I flipped over had this crazy cordyceps growing on it. And so I flipped over about 10,000 more leaves and didn't find a single other one. But it is one of the more common cordyceps we find. I've seen it about 6 times in the last month. Here is some sort of nymph that is kind of pretending to be a moss or a lichen. And the Entoloma diversity here is really good. This one is called Entoloma dragonosporum. Here's a Favolacea, little gecko. Looks really, really cool, just zooming in on him. And then this one is called Gibellula. And Gibellula grows on spiders. So this is another one that you find growing underneath leaves. And so here's the spider down here, and then it's making the spores up here. And then this one here is called Gliocephala. And Gliocephala, really, really cool, really tiny thing. This whole thing that we're looking at, the whole stem, is the stem of a leaf. And so you can see they're just really tiny, but you can kind of see the reflection of the jungle in the background of the droplets here. Here is Gliocephala lutea. This one I found in 2020, and I haven't seen it since. And there's not very many boletes around here, but this is one. This is a mycorrhizal bolete that grows with alder. And so this one is Gyrodon, probably Gyrodon monticola. We find that kind of higher elevation. This one here is growing on a daddy longlegs. And so this one is a Bovaria. It's making the flask-shaped parathecia here. And if you look here, all of these kind of things that you see in the air, that's actually the spores that are flying off of it. So I had a really bright light I was using, and the spores here are really long and really thin, so you can see the spores flying through the air. And the daddy longlegs are beautiful and huge. So here's what they look like in ultraviolet light. This is called Phasocranus hermosa, and hermosa means beautiful in Spanish. But we see these things pretty often. They're about 6 inches across. Here's what they look like in white light. Looks kind of scary, but they're not. Here's one of my favorite Entolomas, Entoloma styrophorum. Looks really cool in ultraviolet. And a lot of times, the jungle is really difficult to walk through. So we walk along the streams. Those are kind of like natural trails through the jungle. So as you're kind of walking along mushroom hunting, this is generally what it looks like. This one is Lepiota erythrosticta. Really cool thing that I found like just in the middle of the trail. And then this one, Leucocaprinus, close relative of the thing that you see in your flower pots. Here's another Leucocaprinus. We see a lot of these. And then this one is Trichilomopsis. So in California, our Trichilomopsis are red and look like Gymnopilus, but here they're mostly bright yellow. Here's some more moths. Cannot get enough of these moths. There's just a ton of them. This one reminds me of some kind of map or atlas. A lot of them are furry and have really interesting patterns on them. Here's a leopard-looking one with looks like a liquid metal band on the outside. I like the green ones a lot. This one kind of reminds me of a banana. Some of them look like they're on fire. There's an endless diversity of these things. This one I like because it always has little hearts on the back. Super tiny. That's also a moth. I like the green ones the most. Here's some little Mycenas. Cannot get enough of these little mycenas. And then these mycenas, they have this little disc at the base of the stem. Here's some slime molds and cordyceps type things. This cordyceps is called Ophiocordyceps corcurianum, and it always grows on ants. So here we have kind of a carpenter ant type thing. And you can see the spores coming out of the parathecia here, the really long, thin spores. This cordyceps is now known as Paraisaria amazonica, and it always is found on grasshoppers. And there are a ton of orchids here. So here we are photographing an orchid in ultraviolet light, but the orchids grow up in trees, and you can see 100 different species of orchids in a day. These things, a lot of them are super rare. And it's really colorful, cool things. Here's kind of a little, maybe Crepidotus, kind of just a regular little brown spored mushroom, but in ultraviolet light, it turns bright, bright blue. There's a Phaeoclavulina. And then this is one of our craziest finds from last year. This is a stinkhorn egg, but it has a parasite coming out of it. And so I contacted a bunch of stinkhorn experts, and they had never seen anything like it. Here's a little guild mushroom. Very mysterious, never figured out what it is. Maybe Hohenbuchelia. And then this one is a lentinellus that only grows on banana leaves. And then here is our pseudohydnum. And so I always like to photograph these, kind of put some light behind them because they're kind of like really transparent, like gumdrops. Here is Psilocybe hugschigeni. So this one was growing right next to a waterfall. And then here is Psilocybe cerulescens. And another collection of Psilocybe cerulescens. This one was growing right in the parking lot here. So these mushrooms you never find in the middle of nowhere. You always kind of find them near human disturbance. And you can see it staining blue pretty well from the psilocin polymerizing. Here's Psilocybe hugschigeni. These have a really acute umbo here. That's what the underside looks like. And they have kind of an unusually dark stem that gets a little bit wider towards the base. Here I tried taking the same picture with a circular polarized filter and without the circular polarized filter. So you can see on this one, there's a whole lot of glare, and it kind of takes away from the color of the mushroom because it's reflecting off the sky. But if I put a circular polarized filter on there, it cuts the glare off. And so whenever I have mushrooms that are wet or have kind of viscid caps, circular polarized filter really helps the actual color of the mushroom shine through. And then this one is Psilocybe moseri. It's extremely rare and was discovered in Mexico. It's only been found on iNaturalist. There's about 30 observations, and 25 of them are within 100 meters of where I'm sitting right now. Another Psilocybe is Psilocybe youngensis. This one grows directly from wood and has a really thin cap. And then this one is Psilocybe zapoticorum. And so this one grows in landslides, and this is the world's most potent psilocybin mushroom. It has up to 3% alkaloids. And it has this really kind of scabrous cap, stains blue really well. Here you can see some dark blue staining. And it smells like cucumber and radish. There's a big river. We did end up crossing this. It was kind of difficult. There's some of our friends that we were hunting mushrooms with. And rarely we see scorpions. Pretty much always need an ultraviolet light to see these things because they really blend in well. This scorpion was in a cave. And then this one looks a lot like cordyceps, but it's not. What we have down here is a little insect, and then it makes this waxy secretion, and the waxy secretion confuses predators. And so a predator comes along and kind of eats this stuff, and then the insect can run away. Here's a lichen called Coengenium. Kind of makes little shells. It's almost like a polypore-like thing that you find on stems of plants. And then this one was really mysterious. Took us a while to identify. But this palm tree here, they call it a walking palm because it has all these kind of roots that come down and bind it into the soil. But the mushroom is in the genus Trichiospora. So Trichiospora thelephora is the name of this. It is very rare. Only a couple observations on iNaturalist, but when you zoom way in, it's got little spines on the underside. Here's a mysterious little yellow mushroom. Have not figured out what this one is yet. There's a ton of waterfalls here, and the waterfalls are really good places to look for mushrooms because they're always wet. Here's a marasmius. The marasmius often have brightly colored stems, which usually fade at the apex. And there are so many different xylarias here. There's probably, well, just on iNaturalist, there's almost 50 species of xylaria known from Ecuador. So there's got to be at least 100 here. So after we collect all these mushrooms, we bring them to the herbarium. So this is the herbarium in Quito. And so this is from 2 years ago. The first time I went to the herbarium, I went and talked to the curator, Rosa. And I asked Rosa if we could work with her and leave mushrooms in the herbarium. And she said, yes, you can, but I'd like you to do some work for us too. And she wanted me to identify all of the psilocybe in her herbarium. So I went through and all of the mushrooms are stored in these little packets. And so here's what the packets look like. They have the species written on them, and it says exactly where it's found, the elevation, the GPS coordinates, description. It's found in 2002. So I went through all these packets and identified them with the microscope. Here's the microscope we were using. It's a pretty nice microscope. And then this here is Rosa. And this year we invited Rosa on our trip. And so she hung out with us for 10 days and we got to hunt mushrooms. It was really cool. Rosa is really excited about mushrooms. So exactly the type of person you want in charge of an herbarium. And then this is Andy, and Andy is the person who introduced us to Rosa and a whole bunch of the scientists here in Ecuador. So now when we visit Ecuador, we have a ton of friends, and there are people that go out into the jungle for a living and collect and study all of the biodiversity here. A lot of times we'll set up a microscope and so hunt mushrooms all day and look at all of the spores and try to figure out what they all are in the evening. And then we set up little iNaturalist projects. And so when we do a foray here, we will set up an iNaturalist project and we invite the whole internet. This year we invited the whole internet and about 15 people actually came. This one was our foray in 2023. And this year is very similar. We found about 1,000 different things and a few hundred different species, and we put them all on iNaturalist. So that way it makes a permanent record. And you can see that we had 191 people helping us identify all of the stuff that we found here. in the couple weeks that we were hunting mushrooms. And it kind of turns it into a game in that you get these kind of leaderboard, the stats, and you can see what the most common things that we saw and who saw the most things. Douglas Smith is usually the top observer. He just comes and photographs everything. He's a Gallerina expert that lives in Menlo Park. Here we had a party at the end and did a group photo. And looks like my time is about up. But if anybody has any questions about hunting mushrooms in Ecuador or anything else, I would be happy to answer them.
Yeah, this is Ben Spencer Cook. You mentioned photo stacking, and you also talked about sources of light. And I'm wondering, one, what model of Olympus do you use? And secondly, what light do you use? Not necessarily ultraviolet, but regular light.
Yeah, those are both good questions. So the Olympus that I have is the Olympus OM1, though there's actually a lot of different Olympus cameras that work really well. And I have the 90 millimeter macro lens. Here I see the host asked me to start my video, but I don't have a camera on this computer, so I can't start my video. So unfortunately you can't see me, but yeah, it's the Olympus OM1 with a 90 millimeter macro lens, and I like that system a lot. One cool thing about Olympus is that when you are photo stacking, you can see each picture as it takes the picture. So you kind of like know exactly where you are in the photo stack, and makes it really easy to see what's going on, and it's really quick. So if I just like set the camera down, press the button, it can take 100 pictures in just a couple seconds and just go through the stack really quick. And then for the lights, I use little LED lights, and I like the brand is Ulanzi, so it's Ulanzi. And I'll carry 3 or 4 of those with me. And usually when I'm setting them up, I'll put like 3 lights. And sometimes I put all of them on the right or all of them behind the mushroom, but more often just kind of close to the lens. And usually what I'll do is I'll take one picture with natural light and one picture with the LED light. And usually when you use a lot of LED light, it looks better, but a little bit less natural. So I like doing both ways.
Great, thank you. Wonderful photographs. Do you use a tripod when you're photo stacking?
Usually, this year I've been trying to do a little bit more without a tripod, and about half the time I can get the picture to look good without a tripod when I'm photo stacking, but it's definitely a better idea to just use a tripod. And that way you kind of set the camera up and you tell the camera what you want it to do, and the photo turns out absolutely perfect and spectacular every single time. No guesswork at all. I can also get really good photos out of a cell phone, but it seems like half the time they're kind of blurry, they're focusing here and there. Whereas with the camera and the tripod and the lights, you can just tell the camera exactly what you want it to do, and it just does it. And there's like, it just every single time you get really repeatable results. So it's definitely worth it to carry a tripod and a camera with a macro lens.
Yeah, great shots. Thanks very much.
Any questions here?
If anyone has any questions.
So if anyone wants to come to Ecuador and hunt mushrooms, we're down here just about every year. And I usually invite the whole internet. So the trips usually cost about $2,500 and last 10 days. And we just go out looking for mushrooms pretty much all day, every day. And so if anyone wants to come and see all these mushrooms, we're pretty much every year we're down here.
Alan, is it always this time of year?
So mushroom season in Ecuador is November through May. And so usually what I'll do is come down here when the mushroom season starts to taper off in California. So as soon as it dries out in California, late January, February is a perfect time to go to Ecuador.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you very much.